Yeah, I mean, I'll do a very brief intro to everybody. But yeah, Mike Butcher, the editor at Large at TechCrunch, is a pretty prolific journalist, and you did an incredible session earlier on getting PR, how to get PR for startups. Now you're joining us for this one, moderating. And we've got Ilya and Thomas, who are two very well-known people in the AI space. I'll leave Mike to do the sort of full introductions because you're moderating this one. But I will hand over to you. And so if you guys have any questions for this forum, and by the way, the topic of this one is how far are we from a hyperreal metaverse? So this couldn't be more topical for today. I think we've pushed the boundaries of what tech startup conferences can do with metaverses with our metaverse today. And it's been interesting to see all the developments. I'm really excited for myself, actually. And so if you have questions, post them in the chat here for Thomas, Ilya, and Mike. And after the session, the plan is we'll all move over to the metaverse. And so you just basically will click the link at the top there that Alex has posted. It's pinned up there, UPPSTART.com/Q&A. And you'll be able to be transported over to an actual metaverse. This is kind of a metaverse in a way, but it's a 2D metaverse, and you'll be able to hang out with all these three awesome speakers. So I'll leave it there and let you crack on, and I'll get out of the way, and over to you, Mike, to kick things off. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jason. So how far are we from a hyperreal metaverse, and what the heck is it, is our session. The word metaverse was first used in Neil Stephenson's 1992 science fiction novel, Snow Crash. Thanks to Facebook and Microsoft, there is now a growing interest around this idea. The metaverse is expected to be the next generation internet built of technologies like virtual and augmented reality. But what is it all about? I'm now joined by Tom Graham, who co-founded Metaphysic to develop software and AI tools that create hyperreal synthetic media, and we'll get into that in a second. Metaphysic is building towards a multi-platform metaverse filled with portable, hyperreal AI-created content that people really love. Metaphysic is the team behind the viral sensation Deep Tom Cruise on TikTok, and you may have seen that video where it looks like it's Tom Cruise talking and walking around and joking around, but in fact, it's a completely different person. But they have overlaid Tom Cruise's face on this human being. So that's an incredible demonstration of the power of their tools. Secondly, I'm joined by Ilya. Now, I apologize, Ilya, if I get this wrong. Gelfenbeyn.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Who is the CEO and co-founder at Inworld AI and a partner at the.ai Ventures. He was also the founding head of the Google Assistance Investment Program. And it is, we were just been chatting before we went live, and he's definitely been a pioneer of voice-activated voice tools. So let's first of all, thanks for joining, guys. First of all, if I can turn to Tom first. I'd love to hear Tom first and then Ilya. But Tom, to begin with you, I'd love to hear briefly, firstly, quickly, let's just hear a little bit about what you're working on yourself. And then secondly, I want to hear your definition of what you think the metaverse is.
Awesome. Thanks for moderating, Mike. Great to be here. So at Metaphysic, what we do basically is focus kind of really on the hyperreal metaverse. And so if the metaverse is, I'll mix up your questions a little bit. For us, kind of like a highly visual set of platforms with portable assets, so people can come into these virtual spaces, which are persistent in kind of virtual space, in that the assets and the experiences and the content lives on even after people log off. It's not like a repeatable experience like in games. So that kind of metaverse idea, but it could be experienced through 2D like we're doing here over Hopin or over Zoom, or it could be 3D virtual AR or VR. For us, the really important thing is not so much how humans experience it, but that it is kind of a seamless transition between reality on one side and then hyperreality. And so the hyperreal part for us is about creating experiences and content and that visual kind of experience, which is, it looks exactly like reality. So building AI voice models to sound exactly like people, doing the visuals, which is, people are familiar with deep fakes today. It's that kind of deep learning algorithms which overlay kind of face swaps or body swaps, or can change movement of 3D avatars to make it more human, to kind of jump over the uncanny valley, to create something where if you were thinking back on it, if you were dreaming about what you did that day in the metaverse, maybe you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between it being in real life or in the metaverse. So that's for us kind of a real focus. And
what's the carry on?
Oh no, and that's really hard to do today because human fidelity for understanding what's fake is extremely acute. We really know when something is off.
Tom, can you just remind us quickly what the Uncanny Valley is?
Yeah, so essentially it's this proposition put forward, I think it was a Japanese philosopher basically, and it is such that when you make something that is more and more human-like sounding or looking like kind of a robot, an animatronic robot, the closer that you get to it looking like a human without it being seamlessly like a human, the more uncomfortable people become. So that's the idea that like it's kind of more like a human, and then you hit the uncanny valley where it's too much like a human, but not quite right. And our brains reject it. It makes us very emotionally uncomfortable. So that kind of like robot that's not quite there and is a little bit weird, that experience is the uncanny valley. And so when you move across that uncanny valley, suddenly you shoot back up to very comfortable with this incredibly hyperreal, I can't tell whether it's real or not, robot, or, in our case, if we talk about Deep Tom Cruise on TikTok, where we've taken a regular person and overlaid Tom Cruise on top of them in a really seamless way. Hundreds of millions of people are kind of initially confused and think that it's Tom Cruise, right? So they don't get that initial reaction of it being weird. So it's kind of jumped over the uncanny valley, and it is in the space of hyperreal.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you for those definitions. Ilya, if I can turn to you quickly again, just tell us briefly what you're up to working on at the moment, and then what's your definition of the metaverse?
Yeah, sure. So at Inworld, like in short, we are building brains for virtual characters. So it's a developer platform where you can create, define virtual characters and then place them to some kind of immersive world. Could be a metaverse or like a game or something like that. So in a sense, it's like an API that accepts as an input whatever the virtual character is observing in the world, like who they are, where they are, who's nearby, what they're saying, what they're doing, and so on. And as an output returns the behavior of this character. And well, obviously, like metaverse is like one of the like ideal environments for such characters because they can fulfill different roles there. So they could serve as just a general population of the world, so that you do not feel like alone. They can serve different functions as like agents, store managers or like insurance agents or world guides or like NPCs in games and things like this, right? So speaking of the metaverse definition, obviously, like it's very vague. So for me, what I kind of decided to treat as metaverse is it's a virtual alternative to like a real life, in a sense that people can join the metaverse and like spend some time there, doing lots of different activities that they would also do in real life. Probably that would like replace their time with like social networks and like blogs and like browsing web. So it's not that like it's any more time from real life. It's just like replacing the.
Ilya, you seem to have gone on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh yeah. And well, there are a number of benefits there, right? So like, well, metaverse could be more accessible for some people than some activities in real life. There are some ways to like socialize better in metaverse. Like it's easier to meet friends that are abroad, or like meet new people in a more safe environment. So there are like lots of different applications, and well, that's very interesting.
Okay, right, guys. What I want to do next is I want to hear from you what your opinion is of what you think Facebook's metaverse strategy is. Obviously, we were well aware that Mark Zuckerberg made a big announcement with a sort of strange video of him in what his version of the metaverse was. Tom, what do you think of what he came up with, and what do you think of Facebook's vision?
Yeah, I think that if you were to sit down and like really think hard about what the future of the metaverse will be, all the different constituent parts, etc., what has to come together, I think you would pretty much come up with exactly what they laid out, you know, over that kind of like hour and a half. The things that I would probably like to see emphasize more are around consent and ethics. You know, if you suddenly start bringing people into the metaverse and letting them interact, you know, particularly when you get to a hyper real kind of space, where you can kind of fool people that it looks like me, it sounds like me, etc. That kind of ethical framework, I think, will be important. And we're not quite at the hyperreal metaverse yet, so there's a lot of space for that stuff to develop. And then the other one, I think, is around kind of data and the ownership of data for regular users and that kind of thing, because, you know, we're really talking about extending our reality and how we interact with things normally into a fully digital environment where everything can be monitored. And that becomes incredibly powerful for advertisers, for people who control and pull the levers of that data. Today, you know, we look at billboards and they're there next to the road, but nobody knows exactly what we're looking at, like exactly which pixels we're focusing on. But that'll change in the future. So there is a lot of responsibility, I think, that comes with the creation of these platforms.
Are you talking about Facebook tracking your eye movements inside VR?
Yeah, well, I guess everybody will know exactly what your screen is pointed at and for how long, etc. And obviously, advertising is going to be a large part of what the big platforms build into these virtual environments.
Well, I can't say I'm very excited by that because, as we all know, the Web 2 platforms like Facebook and Google have, you know, becoming hugely powerful organizations, and you know, and there's some doubt about the positive effects they've had on society as a result. Ilya, what do you think of what Mark Zuckerberg came up with in his vision, and also? I'd like to hear what you think, you know, whether or not you agree with it or what your alternative vision is.
Sure, yeah. So, well, obviously, like what they presented is like very important just because Facebook is in charge for like, well, majority of like all the like VR headsets, for example, right now, right? So basically, if we believe that like, well, huge part of the metaverse will be in VR, well, Oculus is the biggest player there. So we definitely have to listen to it and understand, like to see like how like a big chunk of like VR will develop further. So in their announcement, I think it's obviously just more as just a vision of a future. So in most cases there are like no, you know, like milestones or like timing provided. So they drew a picture of like how the metaverse may look like, which I pretty much agree with. So, and as I mentioned, like, well, so it looks like, yeah, it is an alternative version of like a real life in a way, where so some environment where you can like spend time and so on. So obviously they kind of like touched on lots of different aspects, like, well, avatars and you know, the e-commerce and so on. So all of this makes sense. So big question is like, so if we think about it as a replacement or like next version of the internet, big question would be how like fragmented could it be? So when we say like, well, when we are mentioning metaverse, we mention the metaverse, not like lots of different metaverses here, right? So,
right.
And then the question would be, okay, so how all of this like works together? So would we see like a metaverse from Facebook, metaverse from Epic, metaverse from Roblox, and well, they are not connected to each other, or they will be something like in common? And well, you know, obviously, like if we touch like NFTs and so on, so like one of the values is, you know, them being like cross-platform, so that like if I am an owner, I can use them everywhere. But in general, like, well, I think ideally we would have like one metaverse or some way of like browsing between them, so which is similar to like hypertext in a way. So yeah,
Is that what we're talking about here, Tom? Are we talking about someone inventing the HTML of the metaverse effectively, or are we talking about it being a platform like Facebook where, you know, we can't control, only Facebook controls what its metaverse, how its metaverse operates?
So I think that's kind of one of the core questions in metaverse today. Will it be a closed metaverse or an open metaverse? And so that open metaverse idea is really, you have Web3 NFT blockchain-based solutions which create, you know, the asset, which may be my avatar, and then I want to move that across metaverse platforms. So I want to have, you know, my expensive Gucci suit avatar in my Zoom call, and I want to have it on my Facebook experience in Horizon workspaces or whatever that is. And so the portability of that kind of comes through blockchain ownership and cross-platform integration. And I think that will be an essential part to scale across users, because basically a lot of these NFTs, they're economic units currently. You have to buy that Gucci suit, and you're not going to buy it for, you know, the fancy virtual clothes for $10,000 on Microsoft and then buy it for another $10,000 on Facebook or something like that. So that's also philosophically like the big rift currently is between kind of the crypto world, which is very, very open and very much about empowering the user, and the closed platform world, which is very much what Web 2 is about, right? In terms of data ownership and who controls the rails. So that's currently being played out now.
Isn't the problem that this discussion often that because, you know, Ilya, you made the point that, you know, Oculus is the biggest headset out there, and that's owned by Facebook. So technically speaking, Facebook owns that metaverse world right now, doesn't it? And it's certainly in the VR sense. Excuse me. Is it the case, therefore, that really what we're talking about here isn't a metaverse business model, but a hardware business model? That Apple would be releasing its own AR, VR glasses. Certainly, Google, I'm sure, is thinking about this as well. Facebook obviously already has its own headset. So is it really a case of that this is a hardware play, not a software or a cloud play? Ilya, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I really like your analogy with like HTML. So like not web 2, but web 1 really, right? And well, there are a lot of different aspects here, right? So one is, yeah, like HTML and like connecting all these like resources. But then, so if you compare it to like web 1, right? So like one, what you need is like to create some content, because like, well, there is no sense in like HTML and like hyperlinks if there is no content to visit, right? And this is where like, well, big players are like now developing this content. So next question is, okay, so how to make this all like work together? And well, this is the question of like how to connect these metaverses. So speaking of hardware, well, so if we look at the history, it was not the case. I mean, like, well, the like Apple computers did work with like IBM computers. If we are talking about like internet, so you could create a website like on Apple computer and access it on IBM computer. So in this sense, I think like in short term, probably we will have some fragmentation like this, but like longer term, for sure, well, users will just like users' demand will drive the unification of everything. So I don't think, well, so I mean, like if you look at like Steam VR, right, and like PC VR, PC VR is also dominated by Oculus right now. And it's not because, well, so Oculus has its own ecosystem, but then also they are a leader in PC VR, and it's not because you know, they are focused on like on PC VR. It's because, well, it is a headset that is like powerful enough and so on, right? So, and basically, like if other players match and like, well, suggest better, and like what's probably the most important part is cheaper solutions, right? So that they will have like good chances to be part of it, and I think it will be pretty universal across all the platforms.
I see. So do you see there being links between platforms or one single like open protocol?
Well, so at the end of the day, yeah, I think they will be some single protocol, and well, it is happening everywhere. Like from like recent examples, we had lots of standards for like smart home, for example, right? By Amazon, by Google, by like Microsoft and others, and now they are all sitting together and thinking like how all these devices should actually work together, because it is like a compatibility hell for users right now. So that will happen with Metaverse as well, I believe.
Right. Tom, you've obviously had lots of experience developing very hyper-real synthetic media with the Deep Tom Cruise deep fake. And how do you see that kind of technology playing out in a metaverse scenario? Is it the case that people will be interacting with AIs, which are simply not human beings? But and what do you think that means? Does it mean that that people will have sort of relationships with a hyper-real synthetic being, or what do you think?
So I think just to that hardware point before, I think the hardware stuff will standardize. So how we interact with the content in the metaverse, but the real kind of advantage will come for those who can create the software that can create as much content, basically, because like, the metaverse is highly visual. How can you create those really good quality experiences, which is essentially content, right? For, an internet user scale kind of problem. And so how do you make relevant content for a regular person who just logs in? More than likely, it's going to be through, using the data around them and creating a hyperreal experience, because that's like technically easier than a creator sitting there and thinking up what to do and creating and crafting a specific experience. So building the software to empower users to create their own content that's really satisfying, relevant, and hyperreal will probably be like the core competitive advantage, I think. And then that portability will be essential, because the effort put in on the user level to create something that they want to be in, they're going to want to take that across platforms. And I think that's where standards will drop in.
Okay. There's a good question that's been asked in the chat, actually. Is there a meaningful distinction between metaverses and MORPGs, or MMORPGs, massive multiplayer online role-playing games? I presume that is. Ilya, do you want to tackle that?
Sure, yeah. So there is some distinction. Well, in many aspects, they are like very, very similar. So a huge distinction is that the metaverse doesn't have like a specific set of goals. So you can basically just live there, like socialize, like, and do whatever you want there. So I actually like recently read an interview by a founder of Second Life, who was also like talking about it. And so basically like that's what was one of the like huge like findings for them, is that you do not really need a goal to be interested in being in this world, if there are like a lot of opportunities to kind of like express yourself, to socialize, and so on, right? So that's the big difference. But I think what like metaverses can take from MMORPGs is like the quality of the content, well, some dynamics, and so on. So I would argue, well, potentially, like in future, they will just like kind of like merge with each other, right? So like browsing your unified standard metaverse, you can like join some kind of experience that will be more like a game with some goals, which is again like, well, so if you compare it to real life, well, in real life, everyone decide like what their goals and beliefs and like values are. But if you decide to become like a competitive swimmer, well, that's this like goal-driven like game that you are participating in.
So obviously, I suppose the short answer is one's a game and well, the other one isn't in some ways. Tom, how far away do you think we are from this sort of hyper reality, in terms of our ability to distinguish between reality or digitally synthesized content?
Yeah, I think if I'm going to basically guess, 2 to 3 years, I think you'll start to see hyperreal experiences, which are really meaningful in metaverse platforms or being played out. And you might have kind of like the game analogy, a metaverse-like environment, which is permanent and persistent, in that it doesn't reset like a game resets. And inside that, you may be able, you navigate through there to reach an area which is kind of an experience or a game-like kind of thing that runs over and over again, and you could go through that. And so I think that'll be the first set of things that happen. You may have celebrities existing in these like specific high definition areas that you can interact with, the kind of stuff that Ilya is doing, or maybe it's visually very, very hyper real. And one of the core issues there is around hardware and kind of the render, so visually to get to Hyperreal, you need to do a lot of work to have basically the AI models bring, Tom Cruise's face on top of somebody else's face. So solving for that compute problem and that render problem is probably the biggest bottleneck currently.
What about you, Ilya? Do you agree with Tom's vision?
Yeah. So one thing is, I don't think, the metaverse has to become a hyperreal. So some of the, if you consider this Gather platform that this conference is using, right? It is like a 2D metaverse, but playing it, trying to socialize there, you already can see some of the benefits of, compared to your typical social network or a chat or something like this. So for people, they start feeling that they are kind of it is not an exact alternative or copy of real life, but there are lots of different ways of socializing and interacting there, that it adds some additional value by it adds some additional value. So that said, there are lots of efforts to make it hyperreal, and probably that's the future. So there are startups that are, for example, emulating smiles in virtual reality, right? So so I think there will be companies that are trying to just address all our senses. So yeah, right. So in terms of really hyperreal, my expectation is not 3-5 years, but more 10. But the thing is, I don't think it is necessary, really.
Right. Can we talk about business models? Because presumably Facebook has a business model which is similar. Meta, I suppose we have to call it Meta now, don't we? But it's basically still Facebook, isn't it? Do you think that their business model will be similar to what they've done before? Advertising based, hyper targeted ads, lots of that kind of thing, or do you think it's so obviously there's a obvious business model for them, but what about us? What do we do in the metaverse? What business models can we participate in or launch, or is it going to be a little bit like sort of the influencer network where you have Instagrammers who are basically building businesses on just being influencers inside metaverses? I guess that's one business model, but then what are the other kinds of things? We're talking just sort of e-commerce style virtual goods. Obviously we come back to the issue of Web3 and NFTs and those issues. But what sort of, Thomas, if you could unpack a little bit, what sort of business models or businesses could we run inside the metaverse?
Yeah, so I think from the platform point of view, say Facebook, getting people to buy stuff is probably going to be the core business model. What's really interesting about Web3 is that there is a vast preponderance of companies out there developing blockchain-like solutions which are highly focused on enabling the user, and maybe there is no profit motive at the organization level because maybe it's a DAO or something like that. They're focused on protocols. And so if we are suddenly participating in a metaverse that's highly visual and where NFTs represent ourselves or our digital assets, and you can track the usage of those over time in the metaverse, right? So other people might come to our content world, right, and walk through our experience, and we could get kind of directly remunerated for that through the blockchain, through Web3, because we put the effort into building the content there. And that content may sit on Facebook's platform or anywhere else, on Decentraland, etc. But that's really novel from a point of view of the user, kind of like the opportunity for direct participation that doesn't exist inside an entirely closed ecosystem. That it's pretty alluring, I think, and it'll probably be a core driver. You see a lot of play-to-earn games on crypto these days, and it'll probably be a core driver of user acquisition that the big platforms will have to adopt, because all the early
Ilya, if I can quickly ask you that question. I know we're slightly running short on time now, but what sort of businesses do you think we can run? Is it simply going to be things like virtual goods, or what other kinds of businesses do you see?
Yeah, I think pretty much anything. And well, so basically, if you think of again, like, well, if people spend time in the metaverse, right? So like if they spend like 3-4 hours, similar to what people are spending now in front of TV or like in TikTok or like Instagram, right? So that is like a meaningful part of their life. So so while you're like not asleep, right? So in this sense, like you have all kinds of needs. So like not just like socializing, not just having like these virtual goods, but also like being comfortable, well, or like like buying things, like so some competition for like users' attention and so on. So basically, it will be just like some part of GDP. So like the consumers that are spending in real life, for them, if like half of their life is like now virtual, right? So that GDP that like is now in real life will just move to the virtual life. And obviously, like another angle is like for us and like for startups, providing tool sets like picks and shovels here is very, very important as well, right? So not just content, but actually like making this all happen.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think you've got it right on the nose there, that the people who tend to win are the ones in any gold rush, are the ones who are making the picks and the shovels, not the people digging for the gold. But that was a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate you guys joining us today at Upstart Online. Thank you very much to Tom Graham, who's co-founder of Metaphysic, and also to Ilya Gelfenbeyn. He's the CEO and co-founder at Inworld AI and a partner at the AI Ventures. From me, Mike Butcher from TechCrunch, thanks very much for joining us, and have a great day and rest of the conference. Ciao for now, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Cheers. Goodbye.